John had never considered himself a superstitious person. He was, after all, a practical man who preferred to plan his days with military precision. His routine was simple: wake up at 6 a.m., take a quick shower, grab a cup of coffee, and head to work. The monotony of it all was comforting, nothing ever out of the ordinary. But today, something felt off. It was the morning of his best friend Ryan's wedding. The sun was shining, the birds were chirping, and the air had that crisp freshness that hinted at the arrival of fall. John was in a rush, of course. He had barely managed to finish his work before the wedding, and now, he was trying to make it to the church on time. As he zipped through the quiet suburban streets, his thoughts kept wandering back to Ryan, the groom, his oldest friend, his confidant through thick and thin. They had grown up together, shared secrets, and fought battles side by side. And today, Ryan was about to make the most important commitment of his life, and John was honored to be there. But that was where the excitement ended. John's car swerved a little as he took a tight turn. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A quick glance showed a text from Ryan: "Where are you? You better not be late." John smiled to himself. Typical Ryan, always the punctual one. John quickly typed back a reply: "Almost there. Don't start without me." His phone buzzed again. Another text from Ryan: "Better not be drinking." John snorted. No, Ryan's wedding wasn't the kind of event where anyone would get too crazy. It was supposed to be a classy, emotional ceremony, the culmination of a decade-long love story. But that didn't mean John couldn't enjoy a drink or two at the reception afterward. Ryan had always been the more serious one, while John, well, he had a knack for lightening the mood. As he continued down the road, John passed by a small roadside flower stand. The flowers were vibrant and colorful, a stark contrast to the subdued gray of the day. His mind had been preoccupied with the wedding all morning, but now, he saw the flowers in a new light. They weren't just a decoration or a gift, they were part of the wedding itself. A gesture of love and celebration. It was a detail that many people would overlook, but for John, it felt symbolic. Without thinking, he pulled his car over and parked at the curb. He stepped out and made his way toward the stand. The young woman behind the counter greeted him with a friendly smile. She looked like she was in her late teens, maybe early 20s. Her hands were busy arranging a bouquet of roses, but she paused when John approached. "Hi there," she said, her voice warm. "Can I help you?" John smiled back. "Just need a bouquet for a wedding I'm heading to," he said. "Something simple. Nothing too flashy." The girl nodded and immediately started putting together a bouquet of white roses, lilies, and a few sprigs of greenery. John glanced down at the flowers, admiring how carefully she arranged them. There was something about the way she moved, like she was in her element, fully absorbed in the task at hand. "Perfect," John said, handing over the cash. "Thank you." As she handed him the bouquet, she hesitated for a moment. Then, she reached beneath the counter and pulled out a small, crumpled envelope. It looked out of place among the fresh flowers, the rough edges of the paper contrasting with the delicacy of the bouquet. You might want to take this with you," she said, her voice a little quieter now. She seemed uncertain, almost like she was second-guessing herself. "I think it belongs with the flowers." John furrowed his brow. "What's this?" The girl shrugged, looking uncomfortable. "It's just a note. I thought you might want it." "I'm not sure, but it might be important." John stared at the envelope for a moment. It was just a plain white envelope, nothing special about it. It was addressed, but the writing was smudged in a way that made it hard to read. He could feel the girl's gaze on him as he took the envelope, but he didn't know what to say. Something about the exchange felt strange, almost like a warning. But it was just a note, right? It couldn't be anything important. He slipped it into his jacket pocket, nodded to the girl, and thanked her before getting back into his car. As John pulled away from the flower stand, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't the bouquet itself, it was the note. Why had she given it to him? He didn't know her, and there was no reason for him to receive a mysterious note with his flowers. Still, he shrugged it off. It was probably just a mistake, or maybe it was something for the wedding planner. He wasn't going to make a big deal out of it. The wedding ceremony was only a few minutes away now. John had to focus. He took a deep breath, glanced at the bouquet in the passenger seat, and tried to push the weird feeling to the back of his mind. He was going to be there for Ryan, to witness the moment when his best friend committed to the love of his life. That was all that mattered. John pulled into the parking lot of the chapel and quickly made his way inside. The place was packed with guests, the smell of fresh flowers filling the air. He took a moment to gather himself before walking down the aisle toward his seat. As he settled into his spot, he realized that he hadn't yet looked at the note again. He couldn't even remember if he had taken it out of his pocket. He had been too focused on getting to the chapel and joining the celebration. The ceremony began, and John was swept into the moment. He watched as Ryan stood at the altar, looking both nervous and elated. Ryan's bride, a beautiful woman named Emma, walked down the aisle, and the whole room seemed to collectively hold its breath. The ceremony was emotional, heartfelt. John couldn't help but smile, remembering all the memories he shared with Ryan. The two of them had been through so much together, graduations, broken hearts, jobs, moves, and everything in between. Today was supposed to be the beginning of Ryan's new chapter, and John was proud to be there. But as the vows were exchanged and the moment seemed to reach its peak, John's mind wandered. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the crumpled envelope, noticing it once again for the first time since he'd left the flower stand. His curiosity got the better of him, and without much thought, he carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a small piece of paper, folded neatly. As he unfolded it, his breath caught in his throat. The note read, "You owe him. It's time to pay the price for what you did." John's heart began to race. His fingers trembled as he stared at the words. His mind started to whirl. Who could have sent this? What did it mean? And why now, of all times, was this note appearing at Ryan's wedding? For a moment, the world around him seemed to blur. The vows, the music, the happiness, it all felt distant, muffled. His mind was spiraling, and the weight of the note pressed down on him. What did it mean, and why was it delivered to him today, at this moment? He had to know. But just as he was about to rise and pull Ryan aside, a wave of panic hit him. This wasn't the time. This was Ryan's day. Everything needed to be perfect. John needed to act quickly, but how could he even begin to process the significance of the note? The words seemed to echo in his head. You owe him. What did he owe? The wedding carried on around him, but John's world had suddenly turned upside down. John's mind raced as the ceremony continued around him. The vows exchanged between Ryan and Emma seemed distant, like a muffled soundtrack to the storm of thoughts clouding his head. He couldn't stop staring at the note in his hand, its ominous message glaring up at him. You owe him. It's time to pay the price for what you did. The words echoed in his mind like a haunting whisper. He had no idea who had sent it or why it was now in his possession, but he could feel the weight of its presence in his pocket, almost as if it were a ticking time bomb. He tried to push the thought away, but it was impossible. The ceremony was nearing its end, and John found himself unable to focus on the moment. He should have been there for Ryan, supporting his friend as he married the love of his life, but instead, his mind was preoccupied with a message that made no sense. He kept thinking about that girl at the flower stand, how she had handed him the note so casually, as if it was just another part of the transaction. But there was something about her expression, something that had made him uneasy. She had seemed almost apologetic, like she wasn't sure whether she should have given him the note in the first place. What was she trying to tell him? By the time the ceremony was over, John was in a daze. The couple exchanged their first kiss as husband and wife, and the crowd erupted in applause. John clapped along with everyone else, his movements automatic, his mind still consumed by the note. He could feel the cold air of the chapel on his skin, but it was nothing compared to the chill that ran through him every time he thought about the message. He forced himself to focus as the guests made their way to the reception hall. The entire time, John's heart was pounding in his chest, his thoughts spiraling further out of control. The wedding had been beautiful, yes, but it had also been the moment that had triggered something deep within him, a buried memory, a guilt he had never fully confronted. What was this note trying to tell him? Who was it referring to? And what did it have to do with him? Ryan, ever the perfectionist, was busy talking to guests, making sure everything went smoothly. John watched his friend from a distance, his mind in turmoil. Ryan was completely unaware of the storm brewing inside John's head. How could he possibly explain to his best friend that something wasn't right? That a message had been slipped into his hands during the most important moment of Ryan's life. The thought of revealing this to Ryan seemed absurd. How could he even begin to explain what was going on when he didn't understand it himself? As John walked through the reception hall, he noticed the other guests laughing, chatting, and enjoying the celebration. They were all so caught up in the joy of the day that they had no idea what was happening beneath the surface. The laughter and the clinking of glasses seemed to mock his inner turmoil. John's eyes darted to the note in his pocket again, as if it were calling to him. He found a quiet corner of the reception hall, away from the bustling crowd. The room was filled with soft music, the kind that made everything feel lighter, more serene. But to John, the music felt suffocating. He had to know more. He had to figure out what the note meant. Who was the note referred to? What had he done that had come back to haunt him? He took the note out of his pocket once again, his hands shaking slightly. This time, he studied the writing more carefully. The handwriting was neat, almost too neat, like someone had taken great care in crafting each letter. There was no mistaking the intensity of the words. You owe him. It's time to pay the price for what you did. The message seemed personal, as though it were meant specifically for him. But the problem was, John had no idea what it referred to. He couldn't think of anything from his past that could have prompted such a message. What price was he being asked to pay? And who was the mysterious figure behind the note? John was no stranger to guilt. He had made mistakes in his life, sure, but nothing that could explain a cryptic note like this. The more he thought about it, the more his mind twisted itself into knots. Could it be someone from his past? Someone he had wronged without even realizing it? He racked his brain for any clue, but nothing seemed to make sense. He felt like he was standing on the edge of something dangerous, but he couldn't see what lay ahead. Suddenly, his phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him from his spiraling thoughts. It was a message from Ryan. Where are you? We're about to do the first dance. John stared at the screen for a moment, then quickly typed back a response, be right there. With a deep breath, he shoved the note back into his pocket and made his way to the dance floor. The sound of the crowd grew louder as he approached, and for the first time that day, he tried to focus on the joy of the moment. Ryan and Emma were about to share their first dance as husband and wife, and that was something worth celebrating. The note would have to wait. John wasn't sure what it all meant, but he knew that he couldn't let it ruin Ryan's special day. As he stood next to the dance floor, John tried to push the note out of his mind. He watched Ryan and Emma take their first steps together as a married couple. The music played softly in the background, and for a brief moment, everything felt normal again. Ryan looked happier than John had ever seen him, his eyes filled with love and excitement. Emma, too, was radiant, her smile as bright as the sun. They were perfect together, and John couldn't help but feel a pang of happiness for them both. But even as the couple danced, John's mind couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. He kept glancing at the other guests, wondering if any of them knew anything about the note, about what was going on in his head. But the more he looked around, the more he realized that everyone else seemed oblivious to the tension in his chest. No one else knew that he was carrying a secret that could change everything. Ryan and Emma finished their first dance, and the crowd erupted into applause. John clapped along with everyone else, but his smile felt hollow. He couldn't fully enjoy the moment, not with the uncertainty gnawing at him from within. The words from the note echoed in his mind, "It's time to pay the price for what you did." What had he done? What did it mean? The rest of the evening passed in a blur for John. He tried to join in on conversations, sip his drink, and enjoy the festivities, but the note consumed him. Each time someone passed by him, he felt like they could see right through him, like they knew he was hiding something. It was as if the weight of the note had become a part of him, something he couldn't escape. Finally, as the evening wore on and the last of the guests began to filter out, John found himself standing alone in the corner of the reception hall, looking at the empty dance floor. The music had stopped, and the lights were dimming. Everyone else had gone home, but he was still there, caught in a web of confusion and fear. He needed answers. He needed to understand the note. He needed to find out who was behind it and why it was meant for him. It was clear that this wasn't just a random mistake. Whoever had sent the note knew something about him, something from his past that he had long since buried. And now, it was time for him to face it. But how? Where would he even begin? John took a deep breath and pulled the note from his pocket once again. This time, he was determined to find the truth. He had no choice but to confront whatever this was. The price, whatever it was, had to be paid. But at what cost? John sat in his car, the engine humming softly as he stared blankly at the road ahead. The night had fallen, and the streets were eerily quiet, save for the occasional passing car. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was closing in on him, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. The note had unsettled him more than he was willing to admit, and the weight of it lingered like a shadow over everything he did. The words from the note, "You owe him. It's time to pay the price for what you did," kept echoing in his head like a broken record. He had spent the last few hours pacing around his apartment, trying to come up with some logical explanation, but none came. The words were too deliberate, too personal. They weren't meant for anyone else. The person who wrote them had to have known something about him, something that he couldn't remember or didn't want to acknowledge. And the thought gnawed at him, like a deep ache he couldn't ease. What price did he owe? Who was this, him? What had he done to deserve this ominous warning? John had tried to put it out of his mind, but it was impossible. The note had become an obsession. Every time he tried to focus on anything else, his mind drifted back to the cryptic message, to the feeling of the paper in his hands, to the girl by the road who had handed it to him. Her face kept resurfacing in his memory, but no matter how hard he tried to recall her exact words or her expression, he came up empty. She had seemed like just another vendor, offering flowers by the side of the road, but there was something about the way she had looked at him, something that had sent a shiver down his spine. Had she known something he didn't? Was she a part of this, or was she just a pawn in someone else's game? The questions continued to swirl in his mind as he drove aimlessly through the city streets. He couldn't go back to the wedding, not with the weight of the note hanging over him. He couldn't pretend that everything was fine when he felt like his life was slowly unraveling. But where could he go? What could he do? He needed answers, but he didn't know where to begin. Without even thinking, John found himself driving toward the outskirts of town. The city lights faded behind him as he entered the darker, quieter parts of the neighborhood. The streets here were empty, save for the occasional flickering street lamp casting long shadows on the sidewalk. His instincts told him to turn around, to head back to safety, but something inside him kept pushing him forward. The note demanded his attention, and he couldn't ignore it any longer. After what felt like hours of driving, John came to a stop in front of an old, decrepit building. It looked like it had been abandoned for years, its windows boarded up and its exterior covered in layers of peeling paint. There was no sign of life, no indication that anyone had been here in a long time. But there was something about the place that felt familiar, like it held the answers he was searching for. His heart pounded in his chest as he stared at the building, and for the first time that night, he felt a glimmer of recognition. He had been here before. Without thinking, he parked his car and stepped out onto the sidewalk. His footsteps echoed in the empty street as he approached the building. He didn't know what he was expecting to find, but something told him this was the place where his questions would finally be answered. He reached for the door handle, only to find it locked. His pulse quickened as he scanned the area, looking for another way in. The building seemed abandoned, but he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him. Just as he was about to turn away, he noticed a small alleyway on the side of the building. It was dark, the shadows swallowing up everything in sight. John hesitated for a moment, but something compelled him to walk down the narrow path. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and decay, and the ground beneath his feet was uneven. His senses were on high alert as he moved deeper into the alley, every creak and crack of the building sending a wave of anxiety through his body. At the end of the alley, he spotted a door, old and rusted, but not locked. His hand shook as he reached for the handle, turning it slowly. The door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit interior. The air inside smelled stale, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. John stepped inside, his heart racing in his chest. The room was sparse, with only a few pieces of old furniture scattered around. It looked like someone had once lived here, but now it was just a shell of its former self. He moved cautiously through the room, his eyes scanning every corner. There was nothing remarkable about the place, nothing that stood out. But then, in the farthest corner of the room, he spotted something that made his blood run cold. A desk, cluttered with papers, stood against the wall. And sitting on top of the desk was a single piece of paper, exactly like the one he had received earlier. The same handwriting. The same ominous message. John's breath caught in his throat as he walked toward the desk. The paper seemed to glow in the dim light, its presence impossible to ignore. He reached out and picked it up, his hands trembling. The words on the page were almost identical to the note he had found earlier. You owe him. It's time to pay the price for what you did. But this time, there was something new. Beneath the message was a name, Ryan. John's heart skipped a beat. The name was a punch to the gut. Ryan. His best friend. The groom at the wedding. The last person he would ever want to hurt. But what did this have to do with him? Why was Ryan's name here, connected to this strange warning? Suddenly, the door behind him slammed shut, and John spun around in shock. His heart pounded in his chest as he frantically searched the room, but it was empty. There was no sign of anyone. The silence was deafening. He reached for the door handle, only to find it locked from the outside. He was trapped. Panic surged through him as he realized that he was no longer alone. Someone had brought him here, someone who knew exactly what he had done. And in that moment, John knew he had no choice but to face the consequences of his past. The price was coming due, and it was time to pay. But at what cost? And who would be the one to collect? As he stood there in the darkness, the walls seemed to close in around him. He had made a mistake, and now the reckoning was upon him. What had he done to deserve this? What had he hidden from everyone, including himself? The answers were within his reach, but finding them would come with a price. And in that moment, John realized that the only way out was through. He had no choice but to face whatever lay ahead, whatever was waiting for him. John's heart raced as he frantically searched the locked room for an escape route. His breath came in ragged gasps, every sense on edge. The silence was suffocating, almost as if the building itself was watching him. The walls seemed to close in with every passing second. He paced back and forth, his mind racing with questions, but no answers came. What had he gotten himself into? Who was behind all of this, and what did they want from him? He could still hear the creak of the door when it slammed shut behind him, but he didn't know how to explain it. It was as if someone was controlling everything from the shadows, pulling the strings without him even realizing it. Every step he took seemed to lead him deeper into a maze of confusion and fear. The paper with Ryan's name burned in his hands, its meaning now taking on a more sinister tone than he could have imagined. Ryan. His best friend. The groom at the wedding. What did he have to do with all of this? He reached for his phone, hoping to call for help, but there was no signal. The screen remained blank, as if mocking him. His hands trembled as he dropped the device back into his pocket. He wasn't going to find his answers by standing around. He needed to confront whatever was happening here. But how? Where should he go next? The building offered no clues, no escape, and as much as he wanted to ignore the gnawing feeling in his gut, he knew he had to keep moving forward. The room seemed to grow colder, the air heavy with dread, and just when John thought he couldn't take it anymore, a noise broke the stillness, a low, steady creak, followed by footsteps approaching from the hallway outside. His heart stopped. The footsteps weren't just a sound. They were deliberate. Someone was walking toward him. Was it a trap? Was someone else involved in this twisted game? John's mind raced, his thoughts a jumbled mess of terror and confusion. He had to make a decision, now. His eyes darted around the room for anything that might help him defend himself or find a way out. His gaze landed on a rusted pipe along the far wall. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. He grabbed it, holding it tightly in his hands as he took a step toward the door. The footsteps were louder now, closer. Whoever was coming, they weren't trying to hide their presence. The anticipation was suffocating, and John knew he had no choice but to confront whatever was waiting for him on the other side of that door. The handle rattled, and the door creaked open slowly, revealing a shadowy figure in the doorway. John's grip tightened on the pipe as his eyes adjusted to the dim light. The figure was tall, cloaked in darkness, but John could make out the faint outline of a face, familiar, yet distorted. He took a step back, heart pounding in his chest. "It's time," the figure said, their voice cold, their words heavy with finality. John's breath caught in his throat. He didn't recognize the voice, but something about it triggered a memory, something buried deep in his past. He tried to speak, to demand answers, but the words caught in his throat. The figure stepped forward, and as they did, John saw something glint in their hand. A knife. He took a step back, raising the pipe in front of him, his body trembling with fear. But the figure didn't move any closer. Instead, they simply watched him, their face still obscured by the shadows. There was no sound, only the beating of John's heart in his ears. The tension was unbearable, and for a moment, it felt like time itself had stopped. "You don't understand yet, do you?" the figure said, their voice carrying a strange mix of contempt and pity. "You've been running from your past, hiding behind lies and distractions, but you can't escape it. Not anymore." John's head spun as the words sank in. His past? What did that mean? What was this person talking about? He had tried so hard to forget the things he had done, the mistakes he had made. But now, they were catching up with him, and he couldn't outrun them any longer. His mind raced, trying to piece together the fragmented thoughts that surfaced. Ryan. The wedding. The note. The price. What did they all have in common? Ryan. John whispered, his voice barely audible. "What does he have to do with this? What do you want from me?" The figure's eyes flickered briefly with something akin to recognition before they stepped further into the room, lowering the knife. "You've always been blind to the consequences of your actions, John." But Ryan, he wasn't. He knew what needed to happen, and he paid the price for it. "Now it's your turn." John's heart sank. The words hit him like a punch to the gut, and his stomach twisted with guilt and dread. Ryan. His best friend. What had he done? The memories began to resurface, piecing together fragments of the past, things he had tried so hard to bury. The fights. The betrayals. The lies. Had his friendship with Ryan been a facade all along? Had he done something to destroy it without even realizing it? The figure moved closer, their shadow swallowing John whole. Ryan was the only one who ever saw through your facade, John. And he made a choice that you couldn't. He chose the truth. He paid the price. And now it's your turn. The words hit John like a ton of bricks, and his knees buckled beneath him. His mind raced, trying to make sense of everything, but it was like trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. The figure stood in front of him, waiting for something, waiting for him to say something, to do something. But John was paralyzed by fear and confusion. What did Ryan do? John croaked, his voice trembling. The figure didn't answer at first. They simply stood there, watching him with cold, unblinking eyes. And then, in a voice that sent a chill down John's spine, they finally spoke. Ryan did what you never could. He took responsibility for his actions. Now it's your turn. You can't hide from the truth any longer, John. The cost has come due. A wave of realization washed over him, and John felt the ground shift beneath his feet. The truth. He had been running from it for so long, but now it was here, standing before him. The price was being demanded, and there was no way out. The figure stepped back into the shadows, their face now hidden from view. You'll know what to do, they said, their voice fading into the darkness. John stood there, his mind reeling, his heart racing as he tried to process everything. The truth was out there, and it was time to face it. The question now was, could he? He couldn't undo what was done, but he could choose how to move forward. The hallway was eerily quiet, the air thick with the weight of everything that had transpired. The sound of his footsteps echoed through the empty space, a constant reminder of how alone he was in this moment. But he wasn't truly alone. He was carrying the weight of his past, the weight of Ryan's sacrifice, and the weight of whatever it was that lay ahead. He could feel it, that heavy sense of inevitability that seemed to hang in the air. As he walked down the hallway, his mind raced with a million questions. What had Ryan known that John hadn't? What had he done to cause this chain of events? And what exactly did the figure mean when they said Ryan had chosen the truth? His stomach churned as he tried to piece it all together, but the more he thought about it, the more confused he became. Ryan had always been the one to keep things together, the one who could make sense of the chaos that surrounded them. But now, in his absence, John was left to confront the very chaos that Ryan had kept at bay. He reached the end of the hallway and paused in front of a door. The faintest sliver of light peeked through the crack beneath it, casting long shadows on the floor. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest as he reached for the doorknob. This was it. The moment he had been dreading. But as his hand closed around the knob, he realized that he was no longer afraid. Whatever lay beyond that door, he would face it head-on. He was done running. He opened the door. Inside, the room was dimly lit, its corners swallowed by shadow. The air was thick with the scent of something stale, something old. And in the center of the room, a single figure stood motionless, facing away from him. John's breath caught in his throat as he stepped inside, the door clicking shut behind him with an ominous finality. The figure turned, and for the first time, John saw their face. It was Ryan. At first, John thought his mind was playing tricks on him. It couldn't be Ryan. He had seen him, his best friend, his brother, just hours before. But now, standing before him, was someone who looked almost exactly like him. The same eyes. The same jawline. The same expression of quiet determination. It was as if Ryan had come back from the dead. But that wasn't possible, was it? Ryan? John whispered, his voice barely audible. Ryan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped forward, his gaze never leaving John's face. There was something different about him, something unsettling. His eyes were cold, distant, as if they no longer carried the warmth and familiarity John had once known. The silence between them was thick with tension, and John felt his stomach churn as he tried to make sense of what was happening. "You're not real," John muttered, more to himself than to Ryan. Ryan's lips twitched into something like a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm as real as you want me to be," he said, his voice flat. "But I'm not here to comfort you. I'm here to give you something you never wanted." John's mind was racing, his thoughts scattered. This couldn't be happening. Ryan was dead. He had seen it with his own eyes. And yet, here he was, standing before him, speaking as if nothing had ever happened. "What do you mean?" John asked, his voice trembling. Ryan took another step forward, and John's heart raced in his chest. The air seemed to grow heavier with every step Ryan took, as if the room itself was closing in around them. "I mean that you've been running from the truth for too long, John," Ryan said, his voice low and steady. "You've buried it so deep that you forgot it even existed. But now, it's time to face it." John's chest tightened as he fought to keep his composure. What truth? What had he been running from? And why was Ryan here, now, of all times? "Ryan, I don't understand." John's voice faltered, and he couldn't bring himself to finish the sentence. Ryan's cold gaze never wavered. "You never understood," he said, his voice growing colder with every word. "But you will. Soon enough." John took a step back, his mind spinning. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be real. And yet, the words Ryan spoke seemed to cut through him like a knife, leaving him more confused than ever. The past, the mistakes, the lies, everything was coming to the surface. There was no escaping it now. Ryan took one last step forward, and with that step, John's entire world shifted. In that moment, everything he thought he knew about himself, about his life, crumbled. The truth had found him. And there was no turning back. "Now it's your turn," Ryan said, his voice sharp. John stared at him, his breath coming in shallow gasps. The weight of Ryan's words sank in, and for the first time in his life, John felt truly lost. John's mind was a storm of confusion, rage, and disbelief as he stared at Ryan. The words the man, who looked and sounded like his best friend, had just spoken hit him like a bolt of lightning. The room seemed to pulse with a strange energy, and the weight of it pressed down on him with a suffocating force. Everything he thought he knew, everything he thought he had under control, was slipping through his fingers. The silence between them stretched on, unbearable. John took a shaky step back, his chest tight as if the air itself had become thick with dread. Ryan, no, not Ryan, not really, watched him, his cold eyes never leaving John's face. His expression was unreadable, a mask of calm that made John's heart race even faster. The figure before him, who resembled his dead friend so eerily, was more than a haunting. It was a challenge. John's breath quickened, and the weight of what Ryan, or the being impersonating him, had said began to unravel in his mind. "You've been running from the truth for too long," the figure had said. The truth. What truth? What had he done? What had Ryan known before everything fell apart? John's thoughts spiraled out of control. He'd been trying to ignore the past, trying to bury the guilt of his actions, the wrongs he'd committed over the years, and the consequences he'd never faced. But now, facing the impossible, Ryan's specter in front of him, pushing him toward reckoning, it felt as if the universe had come to collect. His past wasn't just following him, it was crashing down on him all at once. He tried to speak, but his voice faltered, caught in his throat. His mind raced with questions that had no answers. The last time he saw Ryan had been at the hospital, after the accident. His best friend had died in his arms. Or had he? The confusion burned in his chest like a fire that refused to go out. This wasn't possible. It couldn't be. I don't understand, John stammered. His voice was barely a whisper, as if speaking too loudly. Would make the nightmare real. You're dead. You died. I saw it. I saw you, die. Ryan's, no, the figure's, lips twisted into a faint smile. It was a smile that didn't belong. A smile that carried with it a coldness, a detachment, that sent shivers crawling down John's spine. The figure stepped forward again, closer, closing the distance between them like a predator stalking its prey. John's body tensed instinctively, his mind screaming at him to run, but his feet felt like they were rooted to the spot. I died, yes, Ryan, no, the figure said, his voice laced with an eerie calm. But you're not the only one with ghosts, John. You've been running from your own. The words were like ice being shoved into John's veins. Ghosts? He hadn't even had time to process the fact that the man standing in front of him was not truly Ryan. But now, the mention of ghosts, of running from the past, it made his stomach drop. Ryan, his best friend, had died in a tragic accident. But John's mind had refused to acknowledge what had truly happened. What he had truly done. That night, the night of the accident, it wasn't just a horrible twist of fate. It was a mistake. A moment of poor judgment. It was a moment when John had chosen to drive home drunk, when he had let his own selfishness dictate his actions. And in doing so, he had driven Ryan's car off the road. The crash was violent, a blur of metal and glass. John had survived. Ryan hadn't. As the memory hit him, the world seemed to shift again. The ground beneath his feet felt like it was moving, like it was no longer solid. The shadows in the corners of the room deepened, as if the walls themselves were closing in on him. His breath hitched, his chest tight as the crushing weight of guilt slammed into him, suffocating him from all sides. I didn't mean to, John's voice cracked. I didn't mean to. The figure standing before him raised a hand, silencing him. It doesn't matter anymore, he said, his voice colder now, sharper. You can apologize all you want, but it won't bring him back. It won't fix what you've broken. John's eyes widened in shock as the words sunk in. Fix what I've broken. He felt the ground beneath him give way as his knees buckled, and he collapsed to the floor, his mind reeling. I can't. Fix this. I can't fix him. The words escaped his lips in a broken sob. The figure, standing tall and unbothered by the agony John was enduring, tilted his head slightly. No, you can't, it said flatly. But you can do something else. John wiped his face with his trembling hands, trying to steady his breath. His head was spinning, his thoughts racing. What was happening? Was this some kind of twisted hallucination? He could hardly even comprehend what was going on. The world felt like it was slipping away from him, leaving him alone in this cold, empty room with nothing but the remnants of his own failures. Ryan, or whatever this thing was, wasn't giving him any answers. It was simply watching him suffer. And all John could do was sit there, lost in his pain, his confusion. He wanted to scream, to shake himself awake from the nightmare that had gripped him. But even that seemed pointless. No matter how much he wanted to escape, the truth was standing right in front of him. Do you know what the worst part is? The figure's voice cut through John's thoughts, sharp and bitter. John looked up, his eyes wild with desperation. What? The worst part, the figure continued, is that you've been living your life after. After the accident, after the lies, after the destruction. And all this time, you've been telling yourself you're fine. You've buried it. But it's all still here, John. It's in you. It's in your soul. And no matter how far you run, it's never going to leave. The words hung in the air like a toxic fog, suffocating him. John could barely breathe. The truth. It had been there all along, buried deep inside him. And no matter how much he tried to push it away, to forget about it, it had never stopped haunting him. You can't outrun the consequences of your actions, the figure added coldly. And you can't escape the truth. It's too late for that. John shook his head, his mind reeling. He couldn't bear to hear this, couldn't bear to face the reality of what he had done. "I'm sorry, Ryan," John whispered, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "I'm so sorry." The figure's expression softened for the briefest of moments, but it was fleeting, almost as if it wasn't even truly capable of feeling. "Sorry won't bring him back. But what you do now," the figure paused, its eyes darkening. "That's what matters." John stared at the figure, his heart pounding in his chest. What did it want from him? What was he supposed to do? How could he possibly make amends for something so terrible? But the figure didn't offer him any answers. It simply stood there, watching him, as if waiting for him to make a decision. The silence stretched on, each second feeling like an eternity. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure began to fade. Its form blurred and dissipated into the shadows, leaving John alone in the room, breathless and broken. The weight of what had just transpired crashed down on him, and all he could do was sit there, stunned and paralyzed. For the first time in years, John felt something inside him crack. The walls he had built up around himself, the walls he thought would keep the pain at bay, crumbled to dust. And with that collapse, the truth surged to the surface like a flood. He could no longer deny it. The guilt, the regret, the consequences, they were all real. He had caused Ryan's death. And now, more than ever, John knew there was no escaping the consequence.